Hi there. Welcome to The Preventable, the podcast giving you a seat at the table with conversations about the intersection of alcohol, drugs, and mental health in everyday lives. Take a seat and join us.
Hey there. Welcome to a special edition of The Preventable. We're calling this In the Weeds, and here we're going to dig up answers to your questions about cannabis. And wow, are we getting a lot of them. Cannabis legislation, legalization, all of it continues to expand alongside new research. We're learning a lot about the impact of health and the well-being of our youth, and there's a lot of myths. So we're here to untangle it all and dispel those myths so you can have tough but critical conversations about cannabis with the young people in your life. We're going to give you accurate, fact-based information, and might have a little bit of fun along the way. So let's dive in. With me on this first mini episode is Stacie Zellin. Stacie's official title is, I think,
Community Strategist.
3, right? Which
Correct.
means you're old.
Yes, it does. And I am.
Yes. Actually, it means the 3 means that Stacie is the expert in certain topics, and cannabis is certainly one of them, especially as it relates to adults. And I think day after legalization for adult use passed, just over a year ago, we had a ton of questions coming in. And a lot of those questions had to do with what trainings are available for workplaces. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit, Stacie, about some of the questions you've been getting since literally the day after it was legalized?
Of course. So one of my major roles is I respond to requests for trainings and presentations from community members or workplaces, just maybe agencies that are looking for a bit more information on a particular topic. Of course, in this case, we're talking about cannabis. So yes, I do get those presentation requests, and it's been interesting to see how not just, that people are asking for this information or the questions that they're asking, but how much it's changed, like you said, even just within the course of a year. So I remember a year ago, maybe just a few days after the recreational cannabis legislation passed in Missouri, I was at a conference. And initially, there were just questions about, what does this law mean? What does this change? What are the things that we, don't... Or what are the things that are not initially clear about this law? Like, for example, when we passed recreational cannabis, that also allowed nurse practitioners, in addition to physicians, to write recommendations for medical cannabis. So there were even just some, smaller elements to that law that we could explain. So I feel like we kind of started off just answering questions about what this law means. But then we really get into the territory of what are the new concerns? What are the potential public health threats that we might want to be keeping an eye on? And with that, I don't think this is the question that people are asking, but I think this ties in really well with thinking about what do we need to be watching out for. It's also what are the opportunities that this brings. And I can definitely say that, there's so much we could talk about with cannabis, and with challenges. But this is also starting to reveal a lot of opportunities for messaging, for identifying vulnerable populations, or maybe just populations where we need to make sure that they are getting this information. So that's been really interesting for me to observe when I'm responding to these requests, and I'm getting in front of all these different groups who maybe have varying perspectives on cannabis.
Can you give us some examples of types of groups that you've talked to? I know it's really run the gamut. So if people are listening to this and they're like, well, is this a training or a lunch and learn opportunity or a chat and chew or whatever the heck you want to call it? Like, what are some types of places that we've done these trainings at, just to give people an idea?
It could be a social service agency that maybe works with foster children, and they're just wanting to better understand what the landscape is so that they feel more equipped to navigate these very complex situations that they encounter with parents and reuniting them with kids, and how do we address substance use with those parents, where we make sure that we're keeping kids safe, but also prioritizing reunification if that's what we want the outcome to be in that situation. So I've had requests from groups like that, just trying to become more informed to, again, understand the landscape. We decided one of the trainings that we regularly offer at Prevent+Ed is ethics courses.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask about that.
And these are trainings that we provide to typically social work professionals, therapists, anyone who holds a credential from the Missouri Credentialing Board, and that's a lot of different substance use professionals. But we provide these ethics trainings because we need it for our credentialing purposes. You're supposed to turn in a few hours every so often. So we're really happy to be able to provide that because we really like these trainings.
For a low cost.
Yes,
right?
At a low cost, exactly. And we decided to really work cannabis into one of those ethics trainings, one of the offerings that we have. And we started off with a focus on medical cannabis. This was when medical cannabis was first passed, but we hadn't passed recreational cannabis laws. But then, of course, we had to adjust that training once recreational was passed. So now this is a really great ethics training that really just focuses on how do we navigate these conversations with patients or clients. We do provide some information because even though you would think that everybody has this baseline level of knowledge about cannabis, that's not the case.
Yeah, we know they don't.
Right. And that's at no fault of anyone. Nope. Staff at Prevent+Ed, like myself, we live, eat, and breathe this. We are watching for the most recent data for the trends. And not everybody in their roles has that capacity or that ability. So we actually have this really incredible privilege to be able to gather that information and make it a little bit more concise, but also really make sure that we are emphasizing what we think are the key takeaways. What is the most important information for you to be able to do your job well, or, whatever that might be in your professional role, in your community as a parent. So those trainings have been really interesting because even in the short amount of time that we've had those available, I've noticed the conversation has changed a lot from how we started talking about cannabis and how we might start and how we're talking about it now. As an example, this spoiler alert for this training, if you ever want to sign up, the warm-up question.
Which, by the way, if people would want to sign up, they would just go to our website, prevented.org, and we have all the lists of upcoming trainings, including cannabis ethics in particular.
Correct. And I think we have 2 offerings this year, and these are also trainings that are available by request, if that's something that makes sense for a particular agency.
For us to go on site. We're also going to link to the cannabis ethics in particular on the In the Weeds microsite that we have, just because we know that that's something that a lot of people are asking about. So tell us give us the spoiler alert.
So the way we start off these trainings is we ask everyone as kind of a warm-up question, and we pair this with an icebreaker, is we ask about how provider perceptions about cannabis, so their own personal take on cannabis, might impact the care that they provide for someone. So what we're kind of getting at here is we might have a provider who has a more conservative stance about cannabis. And then we have folks that have a more broad view of cannabis and have just a different perspective in that way. And so we ask that question, how does that land with clients? And again, just does that impact the care? Yeah. Does that impact how we're having conversations with them? And then we spend a lot of time just exploring that throughout the rest of the training.
We've also partnered with McMahon Berger, right? Local employment law firm here, John Marino and others, around the complexities with HR and employment practices. We've done a speaker series on that. Is there any of that sort of in the works, or if someone wanted that and reached out to us, is that something we could arrange if they really had like that specific need?
I think we're always happy to make those connections in the interim, but we are realizing that there's this demand for topics related to cannabis that fall outside of Prevent+Ed's
1,000%
wheelhouse.
Yes.
And thinking about employment law, those things are all very important to different agencies in the St. Louis area. So I think that's why again, we're so fortunate that we have these partners that want to work with us, that, we can bring these audiences in and they get that additional information. Something that I would like to see in the future, another idea for just hearing from folks that are outside of our wheelhouse. We get so many questions about impairment and testing and things like that. So something I would really like to do is find a person who can speak to what is happening in the drug testing profession, that community. What are the advances? What do we anticipate becoming available? Or are we realizing that we just may not have, an accurate or at least helpful way to understand if somebody is under the influence or has been using cannabis in that, more acute short-term sense. So that, I think, is also something we hear a lot, and that I've been kind of keeping my ears out for someone to
that would be a really good speaker series or something in the future. Right. I also know that when medical first came to Missouri, you had in particular a lot of requests from law enforcement as well as physicians. Are you seeing that as much, or has that sort of dwindled now that adult use has been passed?
I don't want to say it's dwindled, because I think we figured out a way to keep medical cannabis as part of the conversation when we're now I feel like we just talk about cannabis in general and how people might access it. Because I do feel like you can't talk about recreational programs without talking about medical, because they're similar in some senses. We are getting medical cannabis products from the exact same dispensaries that we're getting recreational products from. And even me saying that to some people is like a point of confusion. They're like, wait, aren't medical products made somewhere else? And it's like, okay, we gotta dial it all back now and start from the beginning. So
back to the beginning.
Right. So we really are talking about the same things. So I think it's okay to talk about them together, just because that helps somebody understand the landscape that much more, is to understand what is the difference between the two, what are the similarities.
I am so grateful for the fact that you just do a deep dive on the topic, because you really are sort of our expert in cannabis when talking to adults, when talking to, I'll say, other agencies, other businesses. I mean, your job is adult education. And I think you and the rest of the staff who you work with to disseminate that information is really, it's pretty incredible. And I would just ask that, if folks have requests for other trainings, other topics, like you mentioned with the drug testing, that they submit those on the In the Weeds microsite, or through PreventEd.org if that's helpful too. I guess, Stacie, in the last couple of minutes that we have left, I wonder, is there any part of this that I have not asked you about that you're continuing to get requests for? Because the other hat you wear is really our OEND hat, right? The overdose education and naloxone distribution. And you do a ton of education on that. You do a ton of work with our mental health first aid programs, teen mental health first aid. So is there anything in particular that I have not picked your expert brain about that you're seeing as it relates to cannabis?
Well, I was reflecting on my bio today. So this is the short bio that I provide when people ask before I do a presentation. And something that I write in there is that I strive to translate complex health information to a variety of audiences.
And you used to be a PIO in a way former life, correct?
Exactly.
And you started out here doing our communication.
I did.
Yes.
So, health communication has always been of huge interest to me. It's just something that I think is really interesting. And I think that's why cannabis is so interesting to me, is because I get in front of so many groups and I kind of have to read the room, where are we at and where can we go? And so I think that's one of the reasons why I like my job so much, is because of that challenge. And I'm always trying to make these micro adjustments in how I have these conversations or how I present material. But thinking about just moving forward, and, I think where we're in these next steps of talking about cannabis and the work that Prevent+Ed is doing, something that I really see as a challenge is really, how do we communicate about this effectively? We got a media request from somebody regarding an incident that happened at a school, and they asked me, they said, what is THC? And again, we live, eat, and breathe this stuff. For me, THC, like that's kind of starter knowledge when it comes to cannabis, but it really gave me this moment of like, wow, we may really have to start with the basics. And we are in a world where people and young people have these super short attention spans. Again, no fault of their own. That's just how we're consuming information now. So it just makes me think, how can we step up and again, translate this very complex information, this very nuanced information, where typically I say, I would like an hour for this presentation. And if we don't have the hour, how do we condense that? How do we, again, hone in on those important parts? How do we just become more effective communicators? And I see that responsibility being on our end. It's not, an audience that does or doesn't understand information. I think it's up to us to effectively communicate that. So that was just the little reflection that I had, and just thinking, again, big picture about cannabis and where there's work to be done moving forward.
And work across our region, certainly across the state, but also across the country, right? And so I think that that's one of the reasons why we have created this In the Weeds campaign, modeled very closely to our Talk About It campaign, because one of the things we get a lot of are questions about, how do I talk to my kid about this? How do I talk to my adult parent about this who is now using edibles all the time, and maybe it's mixing with their medicine? Or how do I talk to blah, 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 fill in the blanks. And it is incumbent upon us, as a public health agency, as an agency focused on substance use disorder, the prevention and the reduction of. And so really grateful to have you as our inaugural guest on the In the Weeds mini episodes of this podcast. So thank you, Stacie. You're a 2-time guest. Really appreciate it. I feel like you need a plaque or something.
Thank you for having me back. I'll take another mug.
Okay, another mug. I will get you another mug. Thank you so much for listening. We are going to dig in again next week. Bye.
Thanks for joining us at The Preventable, brought to you ad-free by Prevent+Ed. Prevent+Ed works to reduce or prevent the harms of alcohol and other drug use through education, intervention, and advocacy. Please visit their website at prevented.org. Like what you heard? Rate, review, and subscribe to stay up to date with what we are serving on The Preventable.